Good evening, and welcome to Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's installment provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep for once. So lie back, adjust your volume, take a nice deep breath, and off we go. Tonight is a very special episode of Boring Books for Bedtime. It's our 1-year anniversary. And I'd like to thank the thousands of listeners who have tuned in and supported us this year. We've grown from absolutely nothing to a little bit of a something, and I really appreciate your support. In honor of our 1-year anniversary, we're returning to the book that started it all. Tonight we're reading A Handbook of Some South Indian Grasses by K. Rangaacharyar, M.A., L.T., Indian Agriculture Service, Agricultural College, Coimbatore, and Fellow of the Madras University. Assisted by C. Tadalinga Mudalyar, FLS, Agricultural College, Coimbatore. Printed by the Superintendent, Government Press, Madras, 1921. Let's pick up right where we left off. Chapter 4. Histology of the Vegetative Organs. The shoots and roots of grasses conform in their internal structure to the monocotyledonous type. In all grasses, numerous threads are found running longitudinally within the stem, and some of these pass into the leaves at the nodes and run as nerves in the blades of the leaves. These threads are the vascular bundles. The rest of the tissue of the stem and leaves consists of thin-walled parenchymatous cells of different sorts. The general structure of these bundles is more or less the same in all grasses. A vascular bundle consists of only xylem and phloem without the cambium, and so no secondary thickening can take place in the stems of grasses. Such bundles as these are called closed vascular bundles, to distinguish them from the dicotyledonous type of vascular bundles, which are called open vascular bundles on account of the existence of the cambium. The component parts and elements of which the vascular bundles in grasses are composed may be learnt by studying the transverse and longitudinal sections of these bundles in any grass. The cross and longitudinal sections of a vascular bundle of the stem of Pennisetum cancroides are shown in figures 22 and 23. In the figure of the transverse section, the two large cavities indicated by the number 3 and the two small circular cavities with thick walls lying between the larger ones and indicated by the numbers 1 and 2 are the chief elements of the xylem. By looking at the longitudinal section, it is obvious that these elements are really vessels, the larger being pitted and the smaller annular and spiral vessels. These vessels, together with the numerous small thick-walled cells lying between the pitted vessels, constitute the xylem. Just above the xylem, there is a group of large and small thin-celled walls. This is the phloem, and it consists of sieve tubes and thin-walled cells. All round the xylem and the phloem, there are many thick-walled cells. These are really fibers forming the bundle sheath. On account of this bundle sheath, the bundles are called fibrovascular bundles. The structure of the stem. The stem of a grass consists of a mass of parenchymatous cells with a number of fibrovascular bundles embedded in it, and it is covered externally by a protective layer of cells, the epidermis. The stem is usually solid in all grasses in the young stage, but as it matures, the internodes become hollow in many grasses, and they remain solid in a few. In the internodes, the fibrovascular bundles run longitudinally and are parallel, but in the nodes, they run in all directions and form a network from which emerge a few bundles to enter the leaves. So far as the broad general features are concerned, the stems of many grasses are more or less similar in structure. However, when we take into consideration the arrangement of bundles, the development and arrangement of sclerenchyma, every species of grass has its own special characteristics, and these are so striking and constant that it may be possible to identify the species from these characters alone. We may take as a type the stem of Rotbolia exultata. This stem is somewhat semicircular in transverse section, and it is almost straight and flat in the front, the side towards the axillary bud. The peripheral portion of the stem becomes somewhat rigid and thick due to the aggregation of vascular bundles, some small and others large. The outermost series of bundles, consisting of small and larger bundles, are in contact with the layers of the cells lying just beneath the epidermis, and these cells are also thick-walled. A few are away from these, being separated by 3 or 4 layers of cells from the peripheral bundles. In all these vascular bundles, the bundle sheath is very strongly developed all round, and is very much developed especially at the sides. It is this great development of sclerenchyma that makes the outer portion of the cortex hard. Within the ground tissue are found a number of vascular bundles scattered more or less uniformly. These bundles have no continuous bundle sheaths, but have instead groups of fibers at the sides and in front of the phloem. The cavities near the annular vessels are somewhat larger and conspicuous in these bundles. The epidermal cells are all thickened very much, and the outer layer is cutinized and impregnated with silica. This is the case in the epidermis of the stems and leaves of most grasses. See Figure 24. In order to give a general idea of the variations in the structure of the stem in grasses, a few examples are chosen, and the details of the structure of the stems of these grasses are dealt with here. The stem of Penicetum cancroides is somewhat round in outline in the transverse section, with a slight curvature in the front. The vascular bundles are rather numerous and irregularly scattered all over the ground tissue. The peripheral bundles are not so close to the periphery of the stem as in Rotbolia exultata. These are separated from the epidermis by several layers of parenchymatous cells. Further, these peripheral bundles are all embedded in a continuous sclerenchymatous band, which runs around the stem in the form of a ring. The epidermal cells, as well as the layer of cells in immediate contact with it, are thick-walled. In the vascular bundles of the ground tissue, the bundle sheath is rather prominent, and the phloem portion is well developed. See Figures 25 and 26. In the stem of Areocloa polystachya All the vascular bundles are more or less peripheral in position, leaving a wide area of parenchymatous cells in the center. The outline of the stem in cross-section is rotund or ovate rotund, with the front side somewhat flattened and straight. The epidermal cells alone are thickened. A well-developed continuous ring of sclerenchyma is present, and this is connected with the epidermal layer at short intervals by means of short sclerenchymatous bands. So the parenchymatous cells of the cortex lying outside the sclerenchymatous ring are divided into small isolated areas. There are 3 series of vascular bundles. One series consists of small bundles lying inside the sclerenchyma ring at the base of each of the connecting bands. The second series is made up of large vascular bundles embedded in the ring so as to bulge out inside the ring. The vascular bundles of the third series are found just away from the ring and separated from it by a few layers of parenchymatous cells. See figures 27 and 28. Another stem in which the vascular bundles are more or less peripheral in position and enclosing a wide parenchyma is that of Setaria glauca. In the transverse section of the stem, the outline is ovate, laterally compressed, obtusely keeled at the back, and somewhat concave in the front. The sclerenchymatous band is narrow and continuous and very close to the epidermis, being separated from it by only 2 or 3 layers of thin-walled cells. The epidermal cells alone are thickened. As to the vascular bundles, there are 3 sets. One set of bundles lying just outside the sclerenchymatous ring consists of small ones connecting the ring with the epidermis. Just inside the sclerenchymatous ring lies a series of bundles which are connected with it. Still inside, at some distance from the sclerenchymatous band, are seen vascular bundles forming a row and enclosing a large space of the ground tissue consisting of only parenchyma. See figures 29 and 30. The stem of Panicum ramosum is semicircular and somewhat flat on one side. The epidermal cells alone are thickened. Another row of vascular bundles lies just inside the sclerenchymatous ring, and each of these bundles is in contact with the band. Away from the ring lie a number of bundles forming a series disposed in 2 irregular rings around a broad portion of the ground tissue. See figures 31 and 32. The stem of the grass Andropogon caricosus is oval in outline, the front being flat. The epidermal cells and those below and in contact with them are thick-walled. The sclerenchymatous ring, though present, is very narrow and not very conspicuous. It consists of 1 or 2 layers of cells connecting a few vascular bundles forming the outermost set. There is a series of vascular bundles inside the ring, which surrounds a large area of the ground tissue. 2 isolated bundles, one in front and another at the back of the ground tissue, are found. The cells of the ground tissue lying just inside the vascular bundles are all very much thickened. See figures 33 and 34. The stems of Panicum isachni and Eragrostis interrupta are hollow. The stem of the former is circular in outline in cross-section, though wavy. There is a sclerenchymatous ring close to the epidermis, but separated from it by a few layers of parenchyma. One set of bundles is embedded in the band, and another set just touches the inner border of it. A third series is disposed around a fairly large amount of ground tissue, which may or may not have a cavity in the center. The stem of Eragrostis interrupta has more or less the same structure, but the cortex has air spaces here and there. Other minor differences may be seen on referring to figures 35 and 36. The stems of grasses growing in wet or marshy situations differ in structure from those detailed above. As examples, the stems of Panicum flavidum, Panicum colonum, Panicum krugali, and Panicum fluitans may be considered. The stem of Panicum flavidum is broadly ovate in cross-section, with a flat front, and is more or less solid, though occasionally the parenchymatous cells in the center get broken. 2 rows of vascular bundles surround a fairly large amount of parenchymatous cells of the ground tissue. There is a continuous ring of sclerenchyma separated from the epidermis by a fairly broad cortex. The cortex has a number of fairly large air cavities separated by bands of parenchymatous cells. Within the sclerenchymatous band lie small vascular bundles at regular intervals just towards the cortex. A few isolated bundles are in contact with the inner border. See figures 37 and 38. The stems of Panicum colonum, Panicum stagninum, and Panicum krugali have in their center in the ground tissue stellate cells with air cavities. This part is surrounded by a fairly broad portion of parenchymatous cells in which are embedded 2 rows of bundles. Outside these bundles runs round the stem a narrow sclerenchymatous band with a few bundles in it, of which some touch it inside and others outside. 2 bundles are found by themselves in the tissue of stellate cells. In Panicum krugali, 3 or 4 bundles are met with amidst the stellate cells. The cortex around the band of sclerenchyma is full of air cavities, small and large. In Panicum colonum, the outline of the stem is ellipsoidal, with the front quite flat, and the cortex is narrow at the sides and very broad in front and at the back. The sclerenchymatous ring is circular in outline. The stem of Panicum krugali is broadly ovoid, and the cortex is uniformly broad. The epidermal cells as well as the lower cells are thickened in the stems of Panicum fluitans and Panicum krugali, but in the stems of Panicum colonum and Panicum flavidum, the epidermis alone is thickened. In the cortical portion outside the sclerenchymatous band, small vascular bundles occur in the stems of Panicum colonum, Panicum krugali, and Panicum fluitans. See figures 39, 40, 42, and 43. The stem of Panicum fluitans is round in outline in the transverse section and has a large cavity. Just close to the cavity and separated from it by only 1 or 2 parenchymatous cells are found vascular bundles forming a series. Outside this series of bundles lies a sclerenchymatous band which is wavy, following the lower edges of the large air cavities. one series of bundles is connected with the sclerenchymatous ring. The air cavities are large and uniform and are separated by bands of parenchymatous cells. In each of these bands lies a vascular bundle on the upper side near the periphery. Sometimes we find, especially in young stages, diaphragms of stellulate cells stretched across the air cavities. Later, as the stem matures, these disappear and the cavities become conspicuous. See figures 42 and 43. The structure of the root. As already stated, the roots of grasses conform to the monocotyledonous type, but the variations met with in their structure are not so great as in the case of the stem. The root tips are protected by root caps, and the actual tip of the root is very distinct in the roots of all grasses, and it can be seen very clearly in a longitudinal section of the root. The actual tip of the root is sharply distinct from the root cap, as there are two distinct sets of cells, one giving rise to the root tip and the other to the root cap. The young root tips are always free from root hairs, and they are confined to the portions behind the root tips. The extent of the root hair region will vary according to the vigor and development of the roots and the nature of the soil. The root hairs are mere protrusions of the cells of the outermost layer of the cortex of the root, and this layer is called the polyphorous layer. To learn the structure of the roots of grasses, we may select as types the roots of Pennisetum concroides and Andropogon sorghum, and consider their structural details. In the transverse sections of these roots, we find a fairly broad cortex consisting of thin-walled parenchymatous cells, more or less regularly arranged. See figures 44 and 45. Just below the polyphorous layer, 2 or 3 layers of thick-walled cells are seen. In the roots of Andropogon sorghum, these thick-walled cells are very conspicuous, as they consist of several layers. These layers of thick-walled cells constitute the exodermis. See figure 46. The innermost layer of cells of the cortex is called the endodermis, and it becomes conspicuous on account of the thickening in the lateral and inner walls of the cells of this layer. See figures 44 and 47. The rest of the root forming the central core is the stele, and at its periphery there is a single layer of cells called the pericycle. The arrangement of the xylem and the phloem is different from that of the stem. They lie side by side on different radii, and not one behind the other on the same radius as in the stem. The number of xylem groups is fairly large, and the development of the xylem is from the pericycle towards the center of the stele. See figures 44 and 45. The parenchymatous cells in the center of the stele become thick-walled in older roots. The structure of the leaf. The structure of the leaf of grasses is quite characteristic of the family. In every leaf, a number of vascular bundles, some small and others large, pass from the base to the apex. Externally, the leaf is covered on both the sides by the epidermis. The spaces existing between the vascular bundles and the epidermis are filled with parenchymatous cells. The larger vascular bundles consist of xylem and phloem, surrounded by a bundle sheath of a single layer of cells. In the smaller bundles, the xylem is very much reduced. Around every vascular bundle, there is a single row of somewhat large cells densely packed with large chloroplasts, the chlorophyllous layer. The vascular bundles are strengthened by fibers on both the sides in the case of larger bundles, and on only one side in small bundles. For a detailed study of the structure of the leaves of grasses, the leaf of the grass Panicum javanicum may be chosen. In a transverse section of this leaf, the vascular bundles are very conspicuous. The larger bundles are normal in every way, while in the smaller ones, the xylem elements are considerably reduced. Around every one of the vascular bundles, there is a single row of large cells containing large chlorophyll grains, the chlorophyllous layer. In a well-developed large vascular bundle, the chlorophyllous layer is open below, just close to the sclerenchymatous band. On both sides of the large vascular bundle, there are bands of sclerenchyma. In the case of smaller bundles, some are strengthened by sclerenchyma on the lower side, and others have none. The spaces between the bundles are occupied by thin-walled parenchymatous cells containing small chlorophyll grains. The lower epidermis of the leaf in the transverse section is even and consists of small and large round cells. The upper epidermis is slightly wavy, and it is made up of some small round cells alternating with groups of larger cells. The epidermal cells lying over sclerenchyma and the smaller vascular bundles are small and round, while those lying over the furrows between the vascular bundles are large and are called motor or bulliform cells. The presence of motor cells is a characteristic feature of the leaves of many grasses. The continuity of both the upper and the lower epidermis is interrupted by the stomata. Air cavities are seen below the stomata. The arrangement of the stomata, the shape of the guard cells, and the characteristics of the epidermal cells become clear on examining a piece of epidermis. See figures 49 and 50. The structure of the leaf of Panicum javanicum may be taken as typical of the structure of the leaves of most grasses. The leaves of Areocloa polystachya, Cynodon, and Paspalums are very much like the leaves of Panicum javanicum in their internal structure. Every large primary vascular bundle in the leaves of many grasses possesses sclerenchymatous bands both above and below. The other vascular bundles may have bands of sclerenchyma on both sides, or on one side only, or none. For example, in the leaves of Panicum repens, both the primary and secondary bundles are provided with sclerenchyma on both the sides, while those of the third order may have it on one side or not. The hyaline margin of this leaf and of the leaves of other grasses consists entirely of sclerenchyma. See figure 53. All the vascular bundles in the leaves of Aristida cetacea have broad sclerenchymatous bands on both the sides. Besides these bands arranged like a girder above and below each bundle, there are on the lower side bands of sclerenchyma, so the sclerenchyma becomes almost continuous on the lower side. The sclerenchyma lying on the lower side of the primary bundles are contiguous with the bundle, while those above are separated from the bundle by the chlorophyllous layer. See figure 55. In the case of secondary and tertiary bundles, the sclerenchymatous bands lying on the lower side are in contact with the chlorophyllous layer, whereas the upper bands are either in contact with this layer or separated from it by a few parenchymatous cells. All the vascular bundles in the leaves of Eragrostis wildenoviana are provided with sclerenchyma on both the sides. The lower band of the primary vascular bundles is continuous with the vascular bundle, the chlorophyllous layer being open below. The upper bands of the primary and the lower bands of the secondary vascular bundles just touch the chlorophyllous layer. In the secondary bundles, the sclerenchyma band above is separated from the chlorophyllous layer by 2 layers of parenchyma. In the case of the leaves of Panicum flavidum, Panicum colonum, Panicum fluitans, and Penicetum cancroides, the sclerenchyma is separated from the chlorophyllous layer by layers of parenchyma. Even from the few examples dealt with above, it is obvious that the range of variation of sclerenchyma in leaves is very great. In the leaves of Aristida cetacea, there is a considerable amount of sclerenchyma, whilst in some leaves, such as those of Panicum colonum, Panicum flavidum, and Panicum fluitans, the sclerenchyma is reduced to its minimum. In the leaves of grasses growing in dry situations, the development of sclerenchyma is generally very considerable. The grass Aristida cetacea is a good example of a xerophytic grass. The seashore grass Spinifex squarosus is another example of the same kind. But in the leaves of this grass, the development of sclerenchyma is not very considerable, but there is a great development of parenchymatous cells free from chlorophyll within the leaf, the chlorophyll-bearing cells being confined to the upper and the lower surfaces of the leaves. The upper and the lower surfaces of the leaves of many grasses are more or less even, but in the case of a few grasses, the upper surface consists of ridges and furrows instead of being even. In the leaves of Panicum repens and Eragrostis wildenoviana, the upper surface is wavy and consists of shallow furrows and slightly raised ridges. But in the leaves of Aristida cetacea and Panicum fluitans, the furrows are deeper and the ridges are more prominent. In Aristida cetacea, the ridges are flat-topped, and they are rounded with broad furrows in Panicum fluitans. The epidermis covering the leaves consists of elongated cells with plain or sinuous walls, various kinds of short cells intercalated between the ends of long cells, motor cells, and stomata. Hairs of different sorts occur as outgrowths of the epidermis. The roughness of the surface of the leaves of grasses is due to the presence of very minute short hairs borne by the epidermis. In most cases, these short hairs are found in regular rows. Although the epidermis is more or less even in the leaves of several grasses, such as Panicum repens, Panicum flavidum, and Areocloa polystachya. It is wavy or undulating in the leaves of a few grasses. For example, the upper epidermis in the leaves of Panicum fluitans is undulating as it follows the contour of the ridges and furrows. The epidermal cells have even surfaces in the leaves of most grasses, but in some they bulge out. In the leaves of Panicum flavidum, the cells of the lower epidermis are quite even, whilst those of the upper epidermis bulge out. The cells of both the upper and the lower epidermis are distinctly bulging out in the leaves of Panicum colonum. In Panicum fluitans, the cells of the upper epidermis bulge out so much as to form distinct papillae. The free surface of the epidermis is more or less cutinized in the leaves of all grasses. In some leaves, the cuticle is very thick and even papillate, as in the leaves of Aristida cetacea and Panicum repens, whilst in others it is very thin, as in the leaves of Panicum colonum and Panicum fluitans. Cutinization is rather prominent in the leaves of grasses growing under dry conditions, and it is less pronounced in mesophytic grasses. As regards size, the epidermal cells overlying the sclerenchyma are small, and those lying over parenchyma are larger. Amongst the larger cells, some may be motor cells. The stomata occur in regular rows between the vascular bundles, and they are quite characteristic of grasses. They are more or less similar in structure in all grasses. In the leaves of many grasses, stomata are found in both the upper and the lower epidermis, and they are confined to the lower epidermis in a few grasses only. The motor cells vary very much both as regards their shape and position. In some leaves, as in the leaves of the grass Panicum flavidum, the motor cells are confined to the midrib on the upper surface. The epidermal cells of this leaf are large and uniformly round. See figures 66 and 67. In the case of most grasses, the motor cells are found in groups of 3, 4, or 5 between the vascular bundles. The central motor cell is usually the largest, and it is somewhat obovate in shape in a transverse section of the leaf. In the leaves of Panicum javanicum and Areocloa polystachya, there are 3 or 4 motor cells in the group, and the group consists of 4, 5, or rarely 6 motor cells in the leaves of Eragrostis wildenoviana. When there are distinct furrows between ridges, these cells lie in the furrows, and they are many in number. In the leaves of Panicum repens, there are 5 to 7 motor cells in the furrows, and the single row of cells stretched between the motor cells and the lower epidermis in the furrow consists of more or less clear cells with sparsely scattered small chlorophyll grains. See Figure 52. All the cells lying in the furrow between the motor cells and the sclerenchyma are clear cells free from chlorophyll grains. Although the motor cells differ in shape from the ordinary epidermal cells in most grasses, there are, however, a few grasses in which the motor cells do not differ very much from the epidermal cells except in size. For example, in the leaves of Panicum colonum, the motor cells are just like the ordinary epidermal cells in shape, but are larger. See Figure 64. Motor cells are usually confined to the upper epidermis, but they may also be found in the lower epidermis. In the leaves of Pennisetum concroides, motor cells are found in both the upper and the lower epidermis, the group in the upper epidermis alternating with that in the lower. Chapter 5. Classification. The family Graminae is usually divided into two series, taking into consideration the presence or absence of a joint in the pedicel or rachis, the number of flowers in the spikelet, and the position of the fertile flower. All the species in which there is a joint just below the spikelet in the pedicel, in the rachis, or at the base of a cluster of spikelets, come under one series, Panacacea. The spikelets of the grasses coming under this series when mature fall away singly by themselves, or with their pedicels, or in groups with portions of the rachis. The spikelets are all similar and consist of usually 4 glooms. Each spikelet contains a single perfect flower, and sometimes in addition a staminate flower just below the perfect flower. In this series, the tendency for imperfection is always confined to the lower flowers, the terminal flower alone being perfect. For inclusion under this series, the grass plant should have both the characters, articulation, and position of the flower, as mentioned above. The second series, Poaceae, includes those grasses in which the spikelets are one to many flowered and continuous with their pedicels, but the rachilla of the spikelet may be jointed just above the empty glooms, or between the flowering glooms. The complete flower is the lowest, and the tendency for imperfection is in the upper flowers. Of the two series, the Panacacea appears to be more highly developed than the Poaceae. Key to tribes. Series 1. Panacacea. A. Rachis of inflorescence not jointed. Spikelets 2-flowered, upper flower bisexual and lower male or neuter. The first gloom the smallest. A1. Panacea. Spikelets 1-flowered. Spikelets articulate on their pedicels and falling away from them. Flowers bisexual and usually with 6 stamens. A2. Orizea. Spikelets falling away with their pedicels. Flowers bisexual or rarely imperfect. A3. Zoysia. B. Rachis of inflorescence usually jointed. Spikelets usually binnate, trinate at the top. Pairs of spikelets alike or dissimilar. Empty glooms larger and the flowering glooms smaller. Hyaline. The 4th gloom awned or reduced to an awn. B4. Andropogoniae. Series 2. Poaceae. A. Rachilla produced or not beyond the flowering gloom. Spikelets 1-flowered with 3 glooms. First and second empty. Third flowering and awned. Rachilla jointed. A5. Agrostidae. Spikelets 1 or more flowered, biseriate and second on an inarticulate spike, or on the spigiform branches of a slender panicle. Flowers all or the lower only bisexual. A6 Chloridae. B. Rachilla produced beyond the uppermost flowering glume and articulate. Spikelets 2 or more flowered, pediceled, rarely sessile, in effuse, contracted or rarely spigiform panicles. B7 Festicaceae. Spikelets 1 or more flowered, sessile, 1 to 2 or more seriate on the rachis of a simple spike, or partially sunk in cavities of the same. Glooms awned or not. First and second glooms are opposite or subcollateral, persistent or separately deciduous. First gloom minute or absent. B8 Hordeae. Chapter 6. Series 1 Panacea. Tribe 1 Panacea. This is a fairly large and important tribe, flourishing mostly in the warm regions and the tropics. It is very well represented in South India, and 15 genera are met with. The inflorescence varies very much within this tribe, and consists of spikes, racemes, and panicles. The spikelets are usually four-gloomed, and contain one terminal perfect flower and a staminate or neutral flower below. But in the genus Isachne, both the flowers are perfect. In some grasses, the spikelets contain only staminate or pistillate flowers. In coix and polytoca, the plant bears both male and female spikelets in the same inflorescence. But in Zea, on the same plant they occur as distinct inflorescences. The littoral grass spinifex is dioecious. The first gloom on the spikelet is the smallest. In panicum, it is nearly 2/3 or less than the third gloom. It is very small in Digitaria, and entirely suppressed in Paspalum. In Areocloa, it is reduced to a minute ridge lying just close to the swollen, ring-like joint of the rachilla. The second and the third glooms are more or less equal and similar in texture. The fourth gloom becomes firm and rigid along with its polea, and usually encloses the grain. The pedicle is jointed in some genera, and in others it is continuous with the spikelet and not jointed. When mature, the spikelets fall away either by themselves, singly with their pedicels, or in groups with portions of rachis, according to the position of the joint. Bristles or branchlets are often found on the pedicels. In Setaria, a few are borne by the pedicels. The bristles form a regular involucre at the base of a group of spikelets in Penicetum, and in Cancrus, these become united at the base into a mass forming a kind of burr around the spikelets. Genera 1 Paspalum. These are annuals or perennials. The spikelets are plano-convex, orbicular to oblong, obtuse, second, two-ranked on the flattened or triquetrous rachis of the spike-like branches of a raceme, one-flowered and falling off entire from the very short or obscure pedicels. There are 3 glooms, all more or less equal and similar. The first and the second glooms are membranous, alike and as long as the third, The second glume is usually epauleate and occasionally with a minute polea. The third glume is chartaceous to subcoriaceous and palliate. Loticules are 2 and small. Stamens are 3. The styles are slender and distinct, with plumose stigmas exerted at the top of the spikelet. Grain is tightly enclosed in the third glume and its polea. This is an annual grass, with stems tufted on very short rhizomes, erect or very shortly bent at base, glabrous, bifariously leafy and varying in height from 1 to 3 feet or more. Leaf sheaths are compressed, glabrous, loose, keeled, mouth hairy or not. The ligule is a short, thin membrane. The nodes are glabrous. The leaf blade is linear lanceolate, finely acuminate, keeled with a distinct midrib, and with very minutely cerulate margins, 6 to 18 inches by 1/12 to 1/3 inch. The inflorescence consists of 2 to 5 sessile alternate spikes, usually distant and spreading, and varying in length from 1 to 8 inches. The rachis is flattened and winged. The spikelets are either orbicular or ovate oblong, as broad as the rachis, glabrous, closely imbricating in 2 rows, rarely in 3 or 4 rows, sessile or rarely geminate on a common pedicel. There are 3 glumes. The first glume is concave, 3 to 5 nerved, rarely 3 to 7 nerved. The second glume is flat, 5 nerved, with 2 strong submarginal nerves, sometimes with shallow transverse pits along the margins. The third glume is thickly coriaceous, brownish, shining, minutely striolate, margins roundly incurved throughout its length, palliate. The polea is similar to the glume in structure and color, margins strongly inflexed, and with 2 broad membranous auricles almost overlapping just below the middle. There are 3 stamens. The stigmas are white, both when young and while fading. The style branches are diverging widely and then straight. There are 2 oblong cuneate fleshy loticules. This grass flourishes all over the presidency in moist places, such as bunds of wet lands, edges of ponds and lakes, and in marshy land. There are 2 forms of this grass, one with round and another with ovate oblong spikelets. They also vary in the size of the spikelets. Some forms have small spikelets and others large. Sometimes the spikelets show variation in the number of glumes. This grass is also cultivated for its grain. In cultivated forms, the spikelets are larger and the whole plant grows bigger. It is grown both in wet and dry land. Distribution throughout India, wild and also cultivated. 2. Genera Digitaria. Annuals or perennials. The spikelets are lanceolate, 2 to 3 nate, indigitate or racemose spikes, jointed on the pedicels but not thickened at the base, 1-flowered. There are usually 4 dissimilar glumes in the spikelet. The first glume is hyaline, very minute, sometimes absent in the same species. The second glume is membranous, 1 to 5 nerved or nerveless. The third gloom is membranous, almost equal to the fourth, usually 7 to 9 nerved, the nerves being straight, close, parallel, and prominent, with a minute polea or without a polea. The fourth gloom is chartaceous or subchartaceous, usually 3 nerved and palliate. Polea is equal to and similar to the fourth gloom, 2 nerved. Loticules are 2, small and broadly cuneate. Stamens are 3. Styles are distinct with plumostigmas exerted laterally near the apex of the spikelet. Grain is enclosed in the fourth gloom and its polea. This is an annual grass, either with erect tall stems or long prostrate stems, varying in length from 1 to 3 feet or more. The leaf sheath is herbaceous, loose and glabrous. The ligule is a distinct membrane. The nodes are glabrous. The leaf blade is linear lanceolate or linear, flat, glabrous, or very sparsely hairy, varying in length from 2 to 5 or 6 inches, and in breadth from 1/6 to 1/3 inch. The spikes are usually few, 2 to 6, 3 to 6 inches long, with a triquetrous, narrowly winged rachis. The spikelets are oblong, acute, pinnate, one pedicel being shorter than the other, usually oppressed to the rachis and not spreading. There are 4 glooms, including the minute gloom. The first gloom is a very minute scale. The second gloom is about half as long as the third gloom, membranous, usually 3 nerved, and sometimes 3 to 5 nerved, distinctly ciliate. The third gloom is oblong lanceolate, acute, membranous, 3 to 5 nerved, sparingly hairy in the lower spikelet, and densely bearded with soft spreading hairs in the upper spikelet. The fourth gloom is lanceolate or oblong lanceolate, acute, somewhat chartaceous, palliate. Polea is like the gloom in texture. Anthers are pale yellow, stigmas are white. There are 2 small cuneate loticules. This is an excellent fodder grass. It grows well in all kinds of soils, rich or poor, and is very common in dry fields brought under cultivation. Distribution throughout India. And that seems as good a place as any to end this evening's reading of a handbook of some South Indian grasses by K. Ranga Akaryar and C. Tadalinga Mudalyar. If you're riveted by these descriptions of grasses, not to worry. There are 300 more pages that sound just like this. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, you'll find a link to a free ebook version from Project Gutenberg in the show description. The description also includes a link to our Patreon page, where you can find out about exclusive perks available to subscribers, including monthly episodes of Boring Books for Bedtime found nowhere else. If you'd like to connect, or suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, the best place to catch me is on Twitter at BoringBooksPod. I really love hearing from you. Thank you so much for joining me this evening and throughout the past year. I look forward to another year of reading you to sleep. Until our next boring book, good night.